Good evening, fantasy football fans. Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Slant, brought to you by Pro Football Focus Fantasy and presented by DraftKings. This is your typical host, Scott Spratt, joined as always by Michael Moore. Michael, there were so many injuries in week 2, I don't understand how Jimmy Clausen isn't starting a game next week. What do you have to say?
Oh, it's early, Scott. Don't have faith. Just have faith in that.
Yeah, if things keep up, it could be just a matter of time. It's the striking part for me, Michael, was that so many of the players that left the game early yesterday were really important players, like some of the leading players in fantasy. So there's going to be a lot of fallout because of that, and there's going to be a lot of waiver wire maneuvering to do. And Michael and I are going to get into that a little bit tonight, among other topics. But I think we're going to start by focusing more on who we think are maybe some additions in shallow, medium, and deep formats, because obviously depending on who you have on your team, that could affect who you're targeting, etc. But I think it's good for us to just, instead of breaking down all the injured players off the top, let's just go with the assumption that they're probably going to be out, and let's talk about the players that could be replacing them and what we think of their values. Does that work for you, Michael?
Sounds good, Scotty. I'm ready.
Okay. I'll mention that we're recording this in the hour leading up to the Monday night game. So all of this, as all of our Monday podcasts, will include all of the games from Sunday and previous. Okay. So let's start with this waiver wire replacement pieces. We're talking about the guys that are going to be replacing injured players. Follow the news to see whether your players are actually going to miss time. Players like Deshaun Jackson, for instance, may not actually miss a game. But I think we're going to do our best to sort of identify players that we think are going to be playing, and then talk about whether we think their replacements are worthwhile in shallow, medium, and deep formats. And Michael and I are going to split this up by position and focus on both running backs and wide receivers. So with so much to cover, I think we should just go ahead and get started with running backs here. Michael, let's start with the shallow format. If it's a shallow league, what running back are you targeting with your number one waiver pick?
I think this was one, Scotty, that you and I agree on. I think that would probably be Niles Davis for a couple reasons. One, you've got Jamal Charles out with the high ankle sprain, which that's always a fairly serious injury, and you're probably looking at least 4 weeks that you're going to get out of Davis. And, you know, all indications are they kept the same game plan. I mean, he led the team with 9 targets yesterday. Now, given they were behind for most of the game, or all the game, rather, but yeah, it seems like they're not really going to change the game plan a whole lot, and quite frankly, I don't think they have the receiving core to do that. So, yeah, he would be at the top of my list.
I feel like you can always count on the Chiefs to just rely on a single back, no matter who their primary back is and who their backup is, which I really appreciate as a fantasy owner.
Hey, so we'll find out when Charles comes back, Scott. So
that's true. And, you know, people, when they return from high ankle sprains, they often return quickly, but then don't actually do anything in the game. So I think you can take Davis and rely on him for several weeks, potentially even a week or two after Charles is back. What we've seen from Davis so far is 4 touchdowns and 8 receptions in his 2 career starts. I'm totally fine using Davis probably as a top 10 running back in the meantime. So I agree with you there on the shallow format ad. Davis is owned in 19% of Yahoo leagues. I checked those for the guys that I'm picking. So let's drop down to medium format, some medium depth. Here, I'm targeting Donald Brown. Brown is owned in 9% of Yahoo leagues, and it may be a bit of a surprise for a guy that sort of has a bad reputation as a runner, but last year, 3.3 yards after contact per attempt, that was the best in the NFL among qualified backs. It was a little bit of a surprise, I think, to see that Brown get only a little bit of work in week 1. We thought that the Chargers might be going with a 3 running back backfield, but I think now that Matthews may be out for a little bit, Brown can probably do everything Matthews was doing and be a top 20 running back.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's a good pickup. Yeah, I mean, Donald Brown's not a bad player just in a vacuum. I mean, he averaged 5 yards a carry last year behind the same offensive line that Trent Richardson averaged 3.3. So, it's not like Donald Brown is a replacement level player. He's probably a little bit above that. And look, San Diego has a good offense. I mean, let's not forget that. So I think any running back that's getting the majority of the work there is probably going to be a decent pickup. Now, it does depend, obviously, on how long Matthews is out. But, yeah, no, I'm good with that. Yeah, and there's no indication that, like, Danny Woodhead's going to start getting 20 carries a game. So if you're worried about
I just don't think he could physically handle it, even if they wanted to try. So
no, that would be like me physically handling it, Scott. So
you're way bigger than him. Just don't give yourself a little bit more credit than that, right?
So I'm good with that. Yeah.
Who's your medium depth running back?
For me, who really surprised me yesterday, and this kind of came out of nowhere, and it wasn't really due to an injury during a game, but rather before, was Bobby Rainey, who replaced Doug Martin yesterday. And he had a really good day. I mean, he had 140 yards on 20 carries. That's a pretty stout yards per carry number. And, it just seems like the chatter lately is just, I don't know if it's the coaching staff doesn't like Doug Martin or what, but it just seems like he's losing a lot of people there in Tampa, coach-wise. And look, even when Martin comes back, which I don't think his injury is very serious, I think Rainey could still see a lot of work there. And definitely this week, with it being a short week and then playing on Thursday, I'm confident Rainey's going to see a lot of work no matter what.
I agree that Rainey is going to be a useful player for as long as Doug Martin is out. But when Doug Martin comes back, do you think he goes all the way back to being the primary runner, or do you think Rainey will continue to have, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 touches a week, or how do you see this sort of playing out over the long term?
Yeah, no, I think 5 touches is probably about right. I mean, there was some talk that Martin didn't necessarily get pulled entirely because of injury last week. It was a missed block. And look, even in preseason, if we all remember, Charles Sims was supposed to be a third down passing back in that offense before he got hurt. So I don't know, man. It seems like Doug Martin is not fully convinced the right people there that he's like the 300-yard or 300 carry a season guy. And I'm going to take whoever's backing him up at this point.
I definitely think he's worth an addition. The thing with Martin, though, is and in the back of my mind lingering is that he was so terrible last year, even before he got hurt, and I don't know what to make of that. But this season, Martin has played once, and it was against the Panthers. It's not the only running back that's going to get shut down by that team. We saw that both the Lions running backs could do basically nothing against that front. I'm wondering if all of this is just really bad timing on his part. I'm not ready to give up entirely on Doug Martin. I think he could come back and be the primary runner again for the team. So I might actually treat this as a little bit of a buy low, but I think you have to own Rainey, whether or not you own Martin at all. I think Rainey can be a useful player, maybe again this Thursday or maybe for a couple weeks. We'll have to see. All right, Michael, deeper format, who is your running back?
This is a guy in some of my dynasty leagues that I held on to last year, and that was Kerry Robinson, who, he's not necessarily going to see as much action, or at least as many carries, I think, as probably Rainey or Niles Davis, but with Mark Ingram out now with a broken hand for probably at least 3 to 4 weeks, Robinson becomes the primary ball carrier there. And look, Mark Ingram in the 2 weeks that he had this season was very effective, and I think Kerry can be close to that. And look, the worst case scenario is he's handling goal line carries for a very good offense. We'll touch on that later when we get to the quarterback talk with Drew Brees, but. Look, it's still a very good offense, and I would get Kerry Robinson in deeper leagues.
Do you think this injury moves the needle for Robinson? If he was is he just basically going to replace Mark Ingram's touch load? Like, do they still have Traveris Cadet? I honestly don't even know. I feel like they probably do. Is this still going to be a 3 running back committee, or is it now a 2 running back committee where you feel a little bit better about both Pierre Thomas and Robinson?
Well, and let's not forget, and we'll cover this on the wide receiver side, but they are going to get Kenny Stills back next week.
He played, believe it or not, in this game. He did that little, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Saints really are hoping that somebody can stretch the field starting in week 3. And look, I think if they have that, I think they're okay, rolling with Robinson and Thomas as their 2 running backs. I mean, you may have another running back get a few carries, but no, I'm fairly confident it's going to be a Kerry and Pierre Thomas show.
Okay. I'm not confident of that at all, but just because I've seen the Saints play in the last few years, but I'm not sure what that means for fantasy. I think if you're trying to target an available player, Robinson is clearly the guy there. For me, in deeper formats, Damian Williams of Miami is the guy that I'm looking at, owned at 0% of Yahoo leagues. He only has 5 carries so far this season, but the door really may have opened for him with both Noshawn Moreno going out. His elbow injury looks like it's going to take him out a month or maybe 2 months. And under the radar there, Lamar Miller actually left the game late. I don't actually know what his status is, but whether or not Miller is back and fine next week, I kind of like what I've seen with Williams so far. Again, only the 5 regular season carries, but he played very well in the preseason. He's 5'11", 222, which isn't that much bigger than Lamar Miller, but when you watch him hit holes, he's just so much more physical than Miller. And I think that sort of stylistic difference is kind of what Moreno showed in week 1 when they were able to take advantage of that Patriots defense. I think they're going to like having Williams to go to between the tackles there. And he actually, well, I'll probably get into this a bit more later, but I think he can actually add a little bit in the passing game as well. So I think Williams is a guy that whether or not Miller is going to come back and healthy, I think you should look at him in deeper formats as a potential deep league flex. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious Miami likes that two-back system. They're not going to have a guy, be the sole ball carrier there. And yeah, look, Williams sort of came on strong there towards the end. I mean, winning the third-string job. So yeah, and with Moreno, I mean, it's really too bad because like we talked about last week, he looked really good, but now he's out a month or two. So they're gonna have to go without him. And yeah, I think we've proven Lamar Miller is not it's not going to be your workhorse back and be effective. So yeah, I'm good with that. And hey, the Miami offense, it's sort of hot and cold. I mean, depending, I think, on whatever defense they're playing that week, I think they could be good. I mean, you're going to get your stinkers like yesterday, but if we're talking deeper formats, like we are, I think Williams is a fine ad.
Okay, let's pivot over to wide receivers. Some of the wide receivers that got hurt, again, are really big names, guys like A.J. Green and Deshaun Jackson. But I actually had a little bit of trouble, Michael, coming up with players that are coming behind them that may benefit from the extra workload. So I'm going to get a little bit creative here, and then you actually teased this previously. But for shallow formats, the wide receiver that I think is going to benefit a lot from an injury is Kenny Stills of the New Orleans Saints. And I actually think it's Ingram's injury that could actually shift the pass-run balance more in favor of the pass in New Orleans, which I'm sure Drew Brees' owners would love to hear, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Stills is only 20% of Yahoo leagues, probably would have been more, but came into the season a little bit banged up, did not play week 1, did play week 2, although you can't really tell because of the stat line. But we've seen the Saints run a lot, run in close. I think they've rushed for at least 3 touchdowns, because I know that Mark Ingram has 3, and I feel like Kyrie Robinson may have 1 as well. I'm not 100% sure there, but they really haven't been able to throw the ball very much, and I think that's probably going to change going forward, especially if they have injuries at running back. So I think Stills could maybe benefit there.
Yeah, and look, like I said, I was going to save this stat, Scott, for the quarterback section of our podcast, and I saw it on Twitter, and I believe me, it's not my own stat, but I'd seen a stat that said essentially Drew Brees in his last 17 road games had 17 touchdowns and 17 interceptions, and that was before yesterday's Cleveland game. So, I think there's probably something to be said about Brees operating on the road, and let's remember, he was on the road the first 2 weeks of this year. So, I think it's only a matter of time before they bust out, and I think, adding Stills is going to help with that, but I think, they're a little rusty, but I don't think that lasts very long.
All right, who's your shallow player?
That was Kenny Stills.
Okay, so you had the same guy there too. We agreed
on
leagues, we both agree.
Yeah.
Grab Kenny Stills and grab Mal Davis. Okay, who's your medium format player then?
For me there, I have Jeremy Curley for the Jets. And given you and I have talked about this before, I'm probably a bigger Eric Decker fan than some people. And look, Decker's been proven to be very effective. Now, he did get hurt yesterday. He pulled up with a hamstring problem, and hamstring injuries, especially for receivers, are always dicey, meaning there's not really an exact time frame or science to it. So I think whoever is going to step into that role probably will benefit a little bit. And it looked like it was going to be Curley after yesterday. He finished the game with 8 targets. And let's face it, there's just not many other options for Geno Smith in the passing game there. So for medium leagues, that would be my guy.
I can't even name another receiver on their team. Honestly, they've got nobody back there. It's probably bad news for the Geno Smith.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's like an ideal situation, believe me, but yeah.
Yeah, but I think that speaks well of Curley's potential to get just a lot of targets.
Yeah.
For me, in medium formats, I looked at Mohamed Sanu. I think that's sort of the obvious play there with A.J. Green looking like he'll miss several weeks. He has just 7 receptions in 2 games, though. He had a really long touchdown reception last week that looked really strong. But I feel like the Bengals aren't going to be really just rolling all of their opponents the way that they did this week especially. So I feel like Sanu is just probably going to get the most targets among their receivers here. They're going to lean really heavily on the run and their defense in the meantime. So not really, I mean, maybe a top 40 receiver in the interim, but I don't think Sanu's anything special here. But if you need a wide receiver, just a body, I think that Sanu could benefit there from A.J. Green's absence.
So is Gio Bernard going to get like 40 targets this week, Scott?
God, what did he have, like 29 carries last week?
Yeah, he had 29. He had 29 touches, I think. No, I think it was 29 carries. Yeah, but yeah, it was
erases all skepticism that people had about him sharing the backfield or him not being a top 10 capable running back. I think that's pretty clear. Okay, in deep formats, I'm again going a little bit against the grain here and going with Eddie Royal of I'm blanking on the name, San Diego Chargers. I think that he may benefit a little bit, too, from the starting running back injury. This is kind of like the Kenny Stills call, and that they sort of relied on him heavily, and I don't know how much of that was game plan against the Seahawks. Obviously, you're dealing with a very stout secondary, and maybe those short intermediate routes are where you can sort of do your damage. But I'm thinking maybe if you lose Matthews for a little while, then you might sort of rely on Royal as a running game substitute, and then maybe he can get, I don't know, maybe 5 catches a game in the meantime, and be a little bit productive in deeper formats. He's available in 97% of Yahoo leagues. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I think even before the injury, he had potential to have some value. And look, I would count myself as a skeptic on the Chargers offense heading into this season. I mean, I concede they had a very good season last year, but I wasn't really sure if they could keep that up, quite honestly, especially with Wisenhunt now coaching in Tennessee. But look, they've proven they can do it. So, yeah, I think there's probably some players there that are going to benefit from that. And, yeah, I wouldn't have a problem, especially in deeper leagues. I think I don't think you can do a whole lot better than that.
Okay, who's your deep league wide receiver?
Well, Scott, and this is really deep. I mean, like, way deep. This is like NFL roster deep. But
okay.
I'm going to go Washington receiver Ryan Grant.
Oh.
Rookie who had a very good training camp. And he really, and say what you will about, practicing with Kirk Cousins in the preseason because they were both second string, but, apparently it worked. He had 8 targets at the end of yesterday. And look, in a Jay Gruden offense, they pass it around. They're not shy. So, I think if anyone is going to benefit from the Deshaun Jackson injury, personally, I think it's probably going to be Grant. And look, I don't know what his Yahoo numbers are, but I guarantee you it's like 99% available in Yahoo leagues. So that would be my super deep roster pickup.
It's very deep. That's so deep that I think the Packers running back Ryan Grant is probably in more formats than this Ryan Grant. So.
See, and that's part of the play. You throw people off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah,
that's pretty brilliant.
Well, and I think, depending on who they play, meaning Washington, I mean, it's similar to, what I was talking about with Williams in Miami. It's not going to be a start every week kind of deal. But, look, I guarantee you there's going to be secondaries. You'll want somebody on the Washington offense, whether it's Dallas or the Giants or whomsoever. So, yeah, I think Grant could be a pretty good buy low guy, or buy really, really low guy.
Buy for free guy, exactly.
Right.
Okay, Michael, we could spend all episode talking about all of the injury fallout and the players we want to pick up.
I've got 8 more Ryan Grants, Scott. So.
Okay, well, we'll get to them to the end of the show if we still have time. But there are a couple of other topics that I think are worthwhile, important this week to hit on. And I think the first is some of the quarterback play that we've seen. There have been some surprising positives and negatives so far. And we're going to focus a little bit more on the negatives here. But I want to get your thoughts on some of the players that have surprised here and whether we think that that's indicative of a new level of expected play or maybe whether it's just a 2-week blip and maybe that presents a buying opportunity or something along those lines. And let's start with a couple of star players. First, in Drew Brees. We've touched on him a little bit so far, but as Mark Ingram's gotten all those rushing touchdowns, Brees hasn't really done a lot. He did find Jimmy Graham twice in the end zone last week and made a strong fantasy day for Graham, but other than that, Brees has been very quiet so far. You mentioned the road starts. What else are you thinking about Brees? Do you think the road thing is really what's driving this and it's something you don't need to worry about?
Well, not necessarily that it's nothing to worry about, but for a guy like Brees with such a long track record of success, quite honestly, for him, I think it's too early to to throw in the towel or say he's not going to be able to match what he's done in previous years. Like we talked about before, he gets Stills back, and look, maybe the Ingram injury is sort of going to prompt them to focus more on the pass game now, and they've got weapons for it. It's not like they have a worse personnel going into this year than they did last year. So, I'm not buying it yet. I mean, if he puts up two more stinkers, or rather two more pedestrian games, yeah, then you might have a problem. But for right now, I'm in a holding pattern on Brees.
I agree. Did you see that Marcus Colston didn't catch a pass? I mean,
yeah. Well, I did, but apparently that was the Browns' game plan. I mean, honestly, was to shut Colston down, and they were very effective with it. So,
what a random player to focus on, honestly. I mean, not that Colston's not a great player, but the whole thing of what the Saints offense has stood for the last few years was no particular focus. It's like, I don't understand why that caused problems. Like, it's not like Brandon Cooks or anyone else did much besides Graham. It's just kind of silly.
Well, and look, let's put it in perspective. They scored 24 points. It wasn't like they got shut out, right?
True.
If anything, the defense of the Saints was probably more to blame for that loss than anything. So, yeah, I think, look, is it very un-Brees-like what he's doing? Yeah, but that just speaks to the high standard, I think, you have for Drew Brees. So,
you're right. Okay, the next player, another guy that's been a legend at the position, Tom Brady. He's been much worse than Brees so far, although I think you could potentially make the case that the week 2 was just matchup related, as the Patriots got up huge on the Vikings and then just ran the clock out. Are you worried about Brady at all?
Well, yeah, probably. And I think you and I probably touched on this last week too, but there's just the lack of a deep threat, I think, really hurts that offense. I mean, look, they're a very underneath team between Gronkowski and Edelman and all that. And look, I think teams are probably wising up to that. They realize that, look, they're not going to throw it deep by any means. So, and I looked yesterday at actually our very own Pro Football Focus stats. He had 8 pass attempts beyond 10 yards. Like, beyond 10 yards. That's crazy. I mean, it's very scary, I think, for his production if they're not going to be able to do that. And look, it's not like they've got a Cordarrelle Patterson who can light him up with the yards after catch. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a very big Julian Edelman fan, but he is no Cordarrelle Patterson. So, until they can start opening things up, and hopefully guys like Dobson coming back and healthy can do that, but until they can prove that they can throw it downfield, I'm getting out.
I'm not sure I've ever really bought into that argument about the need to stretch the field, but in watching Brady so far, I'm just really worried about the physical decline potentially. I've seen Brady really underthrow a lot of receivers so far this year. It's sort of the old Donovan McNabb bounce pass situation from the end of his career. I'm wondering if Brady just doesn't have it physically anymore. So as someone who was probably the biggest proponent of Brady before the season started, I mean, I am literally panicked right now if I'm a Brady owner. 60.8% accuracy percentage by PFF stats. That's between Nick Foles and Drew Stanton, and it's the second worst in the league so far this season. I'm prepared to try to trade Brady for, Stafford or Newton if you can get those guys. I would reach a lot deeper. I would go for Russell Wilson. I would go for Phillip Rivers. Yeah, absolutely Phillip Rivers, 100%. I mean, I thought he was potentially a top 5 quarterback entering the season, and he's clearly, for me, not a top 10 anymore.
Well, and look, you made this point, I think, last week. It's the personnel around him, too. I mean, he just doesn't have the same players around him that he used to. I mean, look, you still got Gronkowski, and he's not going anywhere, but, it makes for a very one-dimensional team if that's all you got.
And Gronkowski could be going somewhere to the sidelines if he ends up getting hurt. Somehow he escaped week 2 unscathed.
He actually goes to the sideline like 2/3 of the time so far. So,
anyway, quarterback number 3. I think this is probably the big news item for a lot of people, and that's Kirk Cousins. I don't think we know for certain right now, but it looks like he could be the starter for a while in Washington, either because Robert Griffin's injury could take him out potentially for the full season, or potentially because I guess some people just think Cousins is a better quarterback, and maybe they'll be more successful with him behind center. But where do you sort of stack up Cousins relative to some other quarterbacks that we're more familiar with?
I'm not buying yet. I think there's probably going to be some games that he can produce. I mean, like I said before with Ryan Grant, especially in the NFC East. I mean, I would love to have pretty much anyone playing Dallas. Well, not anyone. We'll cover that next. But I'm not in a buy mode yet for Cousins. Quite honestly, I mean, he ended last year when he took over for Griffin horribly. So yeah, I'm not buying yet. I mean, and let's again put it in perspective. It was Jacksonville, which, as up and coming as they are, they ain't there yet. So yeah, I'm not sold yet. What about you?
I'm not sold either. I'm not sure how good of a player he is, but I think you have to at least consider the fact that the Redskins may have a really, really good receiving core around Cousins. I know it may be a few weeks before we get Jordan Reed back, but Niles Paul has been very effective as a tight end in the interim. And if Deshaun Jackson can come back in a week or two, between he and Pierre Garcon, I think we feel really good about the pass catchers. I think Cousins probably doesn't have to be that good of a player to be an effective fantasy option. I think we sort of saw the pattern for this last year with Andy Dalton. Many people consider him to be a limited player in terms of skills, but he was buoyed by his offense and was able to become a top 5 quarterback in fantasy. And I'm not measuring Cousins as even a top 10 quarterback at this point, but for instance, if I own Tom Brady, I would pick up Cousins right now. And if I own Robert Griffin, I would definitely pick up Kirk Cousins right now. I think at least some weeks you'll be wanting to start him, and I could see him potentially coming maybe a top 12 quarterback potentially this year. I think we'll have to see. I don't think he's actually that good, but I think the situation may be that good.
Yeah, and like I said, he still plays Dallas twice, he plays the Giants twice, and he plays the Eagles twice. That's half your season.
That helps. Okay, quarterback number 4, you teased it before, Jake Locker. After the huge week 1 that fooled everybody, me especially, Locker was not able to really do much this last week. What are your thoughts on Locker? Was that just a week 1 fantasy situation that we were seeing?
Yes.
Okay.
Quite simply, yes. Look, yeah, I mean, and again, it's all about perspective, right? So 1 week does not make a fantasy success story when you've got a good 2 years of data to look at. So, and look, it seemed like he resorted to the same stuff yesterday against a Dallas defense that, quite honestly, isn't great. So, yeah, I'm not surprised that he sort of came back down to earth. And look, could he have those random decent games? Yeah, but even last week he didn't exactly torch the Chiefs. He had a good game, but he didn't torch them. And what's even more disappointing is, I mean, look, Delaney Walker had an awesome game yesterday, but no one else did in that receiving game, or the running game for that matter. So, yeah, I think, Locker is back where he was, I think, before week 1.
I'm not quite sold on that. I kind of still like Locker. And this was a weird game in that Dallas was able just to completely dominate the ball on the ground. DeMarco Murray was just so good, and I think they controlled the clock. They had about 40 minutes of possession there. I think that really made it difficult for the Titans to have any sort of success on offense. And while Locker had a couple of turnovers and there's always been the questions about his accuracy percentage, I do think his receiving core has improved dramatically over the last couple of years. So even if Locker himself hasn't improved a ton, guys like Delaney Walker and Justin Hunter could make Locker be better. I actually still probably prefer Locker over Cousins the rest of the season. And even though Dallas's defense is really bad, I think a lot of matchups will end up being better because the Titans' defense will be able to get off the field themselves and give Locker a little bit of a chance. So I still like Locker a little bit. Okay, Michael, we've got a third topic here that we want to touch on, and I eloquently named this part-time players who could become full-time players because they're good at football.
Yeah.
So we wanted to focus
more. That's the direct way to describe it, Scott.
Yeah, I do what I can. I'm an eloquent person. But I think we wanted to target here were players that we weren't talking about in the injury section. These aren't guys necessarily that injuries are the reasons that you're going to want to pick them up. These are players that we've seen a little bit from them so far, and we've liked what we've seen, and maybe that'll lead to them having an expanded role down the line this season, or potentially make them a buy low target in dynasty formats. So I actually had a hard time coming up with some players here, Michael. Really strong concept, but I think both of us probably bullseyed on the same guy. And I'll let you start off with them.
Yeah, and believe me, people that are in dynasty leagues or deep leagues have have already heard of this guy and already had him stashed, but for those shallow leagues, go ahead and get Travis Kelce now, if you can. I mean, the guy's just a physical freak. He, was injured all of last year, and I really think he got lost in the shuffle this year. I mean, you had a bunch of really good rookie tight ends that came into the league that Kelce was sort of an afterthought. And given he was an afterthought even on his own team with Andy Reid the last 2 weeks almost. So, but no, he had 4 catches for 81 yards yesterday, 20 yards a catch, but 30 yards after the catch, meaning he caught 51 of those yards in the air. So he's literally averaging a first down with every catch, or he did yesterday. And still, he only played less than half the snaps yesterday. That's the mind-boggling thing. So hopefully Andy Reid wakes up and puts him in for a full game. And look, when he does, watch out, because I think he could be very, very good. And look, the situation is ideal. There just are no other options in the Kansas City pass game right now. I mean, Dwayne Bowe's a shell of his former self, and there's pretty much nothing after that. So, yeah, Travis Kelce is going to be, I think, a name that will be very popular, especially towards the end of the season.
Kelce has 3.8 yards per route run this year. That trails only Niles Paul among tight ends with at least 10 targets. So I think we both are enamored with him as a pass-catching option. These situations don't always work out favorably because, especially for tight ends, blocking is such an important concern for teams. And I feel like that's what's going on here is that Reid is trusting in Anthony Fasano to be the primary blocker, but I'm not convinced that Kelce can't block himself. So I think his explosiveness as a pass catcher will probably give him a chance to prove himself as the year goes on. So he's sort of the guy that stands out for me here as well going forward. Let's play a little bit of a who would you rather have. Would you rather have Kelce the rest of the way or Delaney Walker, who we mentioned had that huge game for Tennessee?
Ooh. I might go Kelce, quite honestly. It's really close for me, but but quite frankly, it's only close because Walker's the guaranteed starter as opposed to whatever mind games Andy Reid's playing in Kansas City. So, but I think as the year goes on, I think Kelce probably overcomes that and probably outproduces. So I'd say Kelce.
Okay. What about Kelce versus Jason Witten, who has really not done much of anything the first 2 weeks this year?
I still go Witten, I think, in that case. It's sort of like with Drew Brees. I mean, to me, I just can't give up on a guy that has that many years of a successful track record yet. But I'll say this. Would it surprise me if Kelce ended up outscoring Witten for the year? No, it would not.
I think I'd go Walker, Kelce, and then Witten, just to illustrate my thoughts here. I'm worried about Witten. I think that Terrence Williams may be taking over as the secondary pass catcher there, so I'm not sure Witten's going to get his typical 70 catches this year. It may be more like 50. So yeah. I think Kelce's touchdown production is going to probably make him edge out Witten over the long term. Okay, let me think of a part-time player that I think may be good. I've talked about it a little bit before, but Damian Williams of Miami. Even if Lamar Miller is fine, probably not once Noshawn Moreno gets back, but who knows what could happen between now and then. I think Williams may actually be an effective player. We mentioned that he had a very successful preseason. He's got 2.6 yards after contact per attempt. Again, very limited opportunities so far, but he just looked like the physical player between he and Miller last week. I think he has a real chance to have a role here in Miami. And Miami, they're really running out of options because they re-signed. I'm already forgetting his name. I blocked him out of my mind because that's right. Thomas. Yes.
Never forget.
I blocked him out of my mind like it's just a terrible thing. But Daniel Thomas is back with the team, so I think that tells you the state of Miami's backfield right now. So I really think that Williams could end up being a part of the timeshare going forward for the team if either of the primary running backs can't stay healthy for the rest of the season. Anyone else for you, Michael?
Yeah, we could touch on a couple guys. I mean, speaking of Miami, and a guy that really went under the radar, I think, for a long time was Jarvis Landry. Who looks like he won the third receiver position there. So, on 3 wide sets, he will be playing. And especially in PPR leagues, I think, Landry's not a bad player to stash. Probably not in your shallower leagues, 15 roster spots, but definitely in your mid to deep leagues, I think Landry's a guy to start watching. I mean, I think it's pretty evident Tannehill, for whatever reason, doesn't like to go deep very often. So I think Landry could probably benefit from that.
Yeah, and Landry also returning kicks too. So in a league where you get points for that, that could potentially be a place where he would become a useful player, even if he's not getting a ton of work every week, as does the third receiver there. The next guy on my list, Isaiah Crowell, he's been benefiting from Ben Tate's injury, but I know we haven't seen much yet. But is it possible that Crowell is actually better than Ben Tate? He's looked really strong for me so far. Had the 2 rushing touchdowns in the first week, and then in a more primary role, I thought outplayed Terrence West last week. He's a very physical player, and I think that he may be a little bit underrated in terms of skill because, again, he was undrafted, but that was really more about his off-field concerns. Not that those ever vanish in my mind exactly, but he just looks like the best back in that backfield right now, and so I'm just going to trust my eyes there and think that Crowell could end up having a bit of a role going forward no matter what happens with the guys in front of him.
Yeah, the situation in Cleveland, the running back situation, kind of reminds me of the San Diego one that we touched on earlier, where you've got your primary running back who handles, inside the tackle stuff. Matthews there, Tate here, and their primary backup, for Tate obviously is Terrence West, and then in San Diego would be Donald Brown. To me, Crowell is sort of the Woodhead role. Not that he's going to be catching passes, but where I don't think they take Crowell off the field even when Tate comes back. You know what I mean? Like, I think he's going to be the change of pace guy to whomsoever's starting, whether it's West or Tate. I think Crowell's just too good that they're not going to give him carries. Whereas I think with Tate and West, you kind of get the same thing, but Crowell, I think, brings something different. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think he's a home run hitter, that's for sure. He's averaging 5.5 yards a carry so far. So. And especially in dynasty formats, yeah, I think Crowell is definitely the guy to add in that league.
I don't really see it that way myself. I think of West as more the change of pace guy. He's the one that's a little bit smaller, and Crowell has 1 catch so far. I don't think of him as like a third down player at all. So I think of him as more the analogous player to Tate, but I agree with you that I don't think Tate's return is going to stop Crowell from being an effective fantasy player. So we'll see what becomes of that situation, but add him in the meantime if you have the depth there. Anyone else for you here, Michael?
You sort of touched on it with Kelsey, but Niles Paul is impressing me so far, quite honestly. Mm-hmm. With his pass catching ability, his blocking could probably use some work, but with Jordan Reed, it's really too bad about Reed because it seems like he's just injured way more often than he's not. And look, we touched on this before. The Washington offense, I think, is getting ready to gear up and start chucking it. And I think any tight end, whether it be Reed coming back from injury or Paul, is going to be pretty good. And look, if Paul can prove he can stay healthy, that's his job to keep. So, Paul's looking like a pretty good option right now to me.
The Cousins definitely had blinders for him last week. He was targeting him much more often than he targeted even Pierre Garçon. So until Reed comes back, I think you can potentially use him. Not sure about after that, but we'll see. Like you said, he's been in quite a bit. Some other names that cross my mind here. Is it even fair to bring up Devontae Adams? I think he's clearly emerged as the number 3 receiver already on the Packers. I thought about putting Ahmad Bradshaw here, my longtime love. They've already announced that they think that it's sort of an even split there between he and Trent Richardson.
They're just being polite, Scott. They're just being polite.
Bradshaw could be the primary runner there in a week. We'll have to see how it goes tonight. And then I put Devin Hester. I know we've only really seen it once so far, but I was really impressed by him week 1. I feel like he may be the guy, the number 3 guy for Atlanta right now, and I think they could potentially be a pretty effective passing game there. So I'm at least looking at Hester. I'm probably not adding him anywhere yet, but a little bit intrigued, Michael. What do you think?
You can have him, Scott.
Okay, that's fair.
I'll let you have him, Scott. That's my gift to you.
All right, well, I think we've had a pretty successful show here, again, touching on a lot of those injuries, the quarterback situations, and some of these part-time players. I want to thank everybody that's made it this far. Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Slant. And once again, for Michael, this is Scott signing off. We'll talk to you next week.